And as you're arriving, you will note that your audio should be muted, and we would encourage you to keep your audio muted unless you want to temporarily unmute to ask a question or engage with one of our speakers and panelists. We'll do a formal welcome and an introduction here in just a moment. But just as you're arriving, folks from all around our beautiful region, just please be aware that we are recording today's session to be able to share it out with folks that are not able to join us today. And we are really excited to have all of you together again. And as the room is getting filled here with participants, I'm going to go ahead and do a formal welcome and greeting. My name is Aaron McMurray. I serve as Chief Strategy Officer at Innovia Foundation. Today is an exciting day because this is the fourth in our series of events that are connected to the Innovia Foundation Leadership Summit. And for many of you, you will know that in March of 2020, we gathered with over 250 leaders from all around our region for our inaugural Leadership Summit at the Davenport Hotel. It was 2 incredible days of content and inspiration and relationship building. And the timing of that event could not have been more perfect as we look back on this last year and a half and realize how much that inaugural Leadership Summit equipped our leadership councils and many other partners from around our region to come together and respond to the impact that our region has been through with COVID-19, wildfires, many of the racial equity issues that have been happening across our region. And we came together and were able to address many of those issues in a really powerful way. As we came to 2021, we of course could not gather physically for the second Leadership Summit. And so we hosted a virtual event in March, and we chose to do a 3-hour Leadership Summit in March and follow that up with a series of content-based topical workshops. And so our first workshop was around the Transfer of Wealth campaign and the subsequent launch of our 5% Transfer of Wealth campaign. Our second workshop was around equity in skills attainment and how we can work together as a region with cross-sector responses to address workforce development and skills attainment. And of course, today we are super excited for our subject matter today around broadband as an equity issue across our entire region. And we have some fabulous speakers who will be helping to guide that conversation and setting the table for that. But before we get to that, I just want to do a reminder of our housekeeping details. We encourage you to leave your video on, even though we can't physically be with all of you in the same room. We love being able to see your faces, so we encourage you to leave your video on, but we would encourage you to leave your audio muted just to avoid any distractions. We're also going to encourage you to use the chat box along the way. Please fill that chat box with your questions and your comments. And if the use of the chat box is distracting to you, just please minimize that. Therefore, you're not constantly being distracted by those chats that are coming in. But for our speakers and facilitators, they will love to be able to see those chats coming in and be able to respond to some of your questions. And with no further ado, we're going to do our final housekeeping item and then get started. I would be remiss to not share my screen here really quickly and give a huge and warm shout out and thank you to our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor for the Innovia Foundation Leadership Summit and all of our workshops this year has been Numerica Credit Union. They have been an incredible partner to Innovia Foundation in so many ways, and their generosity in their sponsorship is just one of those ways. But to Carla Cicero and Kim Perman-Gilman and Amanda Swan in particular, we have been so grateful to each of those three for their leadership in our region and for the generous sponsorship of Numerica. I also want to give a warm thank you to the University of Washington, to Baker Construction, and to Kimley and Haygood for their sponsorship as well. All of those funds have allowed us to offer every one of these events in our Leadership Summit free of cost to all of our participants. So a very warm thank you to each of them. And with that, I will close my welcoming remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mason Burley. Mason is Innovia Foundation's Director of Research and Community Impact. Mason is a great colleague and has been leading Innovia's efforts exploring why broadband is such a vital issue for a region like ours. And Mason's going to introduce our speakers and we'll jump right in. So Mason, take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. So as Aaron mentioned, kind of the purpose of these forums, and then part of the mission of Innovia Foundation is to support communities where every person has the opportunity to thrive. And the last year and a half have told us that when health and education and economic services move online, it's really hard for people to be successful if access to broadband is limited. A lack of high-speed broadband is really one of the defining characteristics of the urban-rural divide. And as director of research, it's my job to throw some numbers at you. So to think about what this issue looks like in our backyard. So just briefly, within the 10 counties in Eastern Washington and 10 in North Idaho, if you looked at all the rural census blocks in our region, about 25% of those census blocks have no fixed residential internet service providers, and about half have just one provider. So 3/4 have one or zero providers. Conversely, if you look at the urban census blocks, there are 2 or more internet service providers in about 60% of those census blocks. So there's a really disparity in terms of access and, of course, affordability. It's difficult to get information about like utilization, but there is some data that's been released by Microsoft. And in our region, we have about 131 zip codes in our region where less than 1 in 5 households use the internet at broadband speed. And most of those zip codes that are kind of unserved, about 80% are in rural locations. So there's, and if you're zooming in from a rural location, I don't need to tell you this because you live it, or your neighbors or friends live it as well. In our region, there's about 200,000 persons that live in rural zip codes, and 43% of those persons are unserved compared to 10% in the urban zip codes. So this is what is happening in our backyard. And simply put, it's a community issue, not a technology issue. And when I was asked to look at this issue for the foundation, I was a little bit like deer in headlights because I don't have the technological background to think about this issue. But it's more of a community voice is really important when we're talking about how to bridge that divide. And then the more I researched and looked into it, the discussions I had, there's one organization that keeps getting mentioned. The Blandin Foundation, our guest today, the Blandin Foundation is a Minnesota-based foundation that's been working for over 2 decades to support both rural leadership and rural broadband access. So they're definitely not new to the game. They've been doing this for over 20 years. And I'll let our featured speakers talk more about Blandin, but I'd like to first introduce our speaker. Bernadine Joslin is a recognized thought leader in community broadband discussions. She's served as the director of Blandin Foundation's Public Policy and Engagement Program since 2001. Prior to moving to Minnesota, Bernadine served for 7 years as a diplomat with the US Department of State, and she had assignments in New Delhi, India, and Moscow, Russia. She spent the better part of the decade living and working in Russia as the director of the Moscow office of the Eurasia Foundation and director of the Moscow office of the International Research and Exchanges Board. Beginning in 2003, when she moved back to Minnesota, she's led the foundation's broadband programming in rural communities across their state. She represents rural communities on the governor's broadband task force, and she's a tireless advocate for improved broadband in rural communities, recognizing that high-speed broadband is critical infrastructure for the new knowledge economy. And I like it when she says, everything's better with broadband and everything's better with better broadband. We're really lucky to have her today. Bernadine, thank you so much for being with us.
Mason, thank you so much for that introduction. It is really a delight to be here. And I know Jim and Barbara and I are really appreciative for the opportunity to visit with you. Can you guys see my screen here okay? Is it up? All right, thanks Aaron for that thumbs up. I am delighted to be joining you today from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, on the banks of the Mississippi River in north central Minnesota. We are here on the traditional, historic, and contemporary lands of the Ojibwe, and before them, the Dakota people. It's not lost on me, and maybe not on you, that Jim and Barbara and I are able to be with you here today and talk about broadband, thanks only to the miracle of broadband. And connecting in this way is increasingly, right, what the future is going to look like. It's as we're all experiencing it, the future is speeding up rapidly as people all over the globe scramble to respond to the coronavirus is just one example of the changes that we globally are trying to grapple with. And as Wilson Gibson, the guy who invented the word cyberspace, famously says, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Now, we've titled this presentation here today, Rural Broadband, Why This, Why Us, Why Now? And the short answer, as Mason already said, is that I really believe in my work and I care about rural communities and I'm working on broadband. And that's because I really believe that the challenge of our time as people who care about rural places is to ensure that the opportunities of a connected world are evenly distributed, including to rural Minnesota. So that future we need to see in our rural places. I don't know how many of you have been to Minnesota or what you might know about us, maybe Prince, or maybe our famous former governor, Jesse the Body Ventura, or maybe Lake Wobegon, or maybe this guy. See if I can get my slides to switch here. Our most tender claim to fame is that we are the home of Paul Bunyan. Wait, you guys thought you guys were the home of Paul Bunyan? Or maybe Idaho was Paul Bunyan's home? Well, we've got some pretty serious contenders here in northern Minnesota to that claim. I wanted to say that our little town of Grand Rapids here is the county seat of my county, Itasca County, and it's home to Blandin Foundation. About 11,000 people live in our town and about 14,000 in the summer. So you can see the Mississippi River runs through our town. I can see it outside my window here, but actually in Grand Rapids, the Mississippi River flows east to west, not north to south. From its headwaters in the Itasca State Park, which is about 80 miles to the west of us, all the way down to Minneapolis and St. Paul, 175 miles south. So technically, I'm speaking to you this morning from the north bank of the Mississippi River. And now there's a new fun fact to know and tell about American geography, that there is a north bank. This guy here on the left is Henry Schoolcraft. He, with the help of his two-spirit Ojibwe guide, Oza Windib, was the first European to identify the source of the Mississippi River, and he named the headquarters Veritas Caput, from which we get the word Itasca, the true head of the Mississippi River. So Idaho and Washington State border Canada, just like Minnesota does. Itasca County lies about 100 miles south of the border with Ontario. We're home to the Chippewa National Forest, as well as 3 state forests and 4 state parks. Created in 1989, just about a half a century before Idaho and Washington gained statehood. Itasca County now boasts over 1,000 of Minnesota's fabled 10,000 lakes. Of course, those numbers all depend on how you define a lake. We're pretty miserly in our definition. We don't count ponds. Hilly and heavily wooded, Itasca is the 3rd largest county in Minnesota by land area, and includes portions of the reservations of the Leech Lake Band and the Boys Fort Band of Ojibwe. And also the Continental Divide runs through our county at a height of land of 1,437 feet. Height of land compared to the main elevation in Idaho, there's over 5,000 feet. So our county's population density is 16.5 people per square mile, about the same as northern Idaho. You guys have 15.1. So facing a lot of the same challenges, and demography and density, as we'll talk more about, is a really big deal in trying to get broadband. So we, a bunch of small communities in our county have come together and branded themselves as the edge of the wilderness. You guys maybe claim to be the edge of the wilderness there too. We're also ground zero of Minnesota's wood basket, which resources a primary forest product industry that is on the ropes and struggling to reinvent itself. This is our benefactor, Charles K. Blandin. Here he is. He earned his fortune as the founding owner of the Blandin paper mill here in town, which straddles the Mississippi River just across the bridge from our building. In 1907, CK bought the #1 paper machine in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and started up the big paper mill that's been the engine of our community ever since. And we're worried that #7 machine maybe its last. For years, the mill has been the largest and most prestigious employer in town. We had over 650 people with family supporting wages, running 3 paper machines, and providing a really big part of the local tax base. In 1974, the mill was sold to a foreign investor, and it's been out of our community hands ever since. The profits of the sale of that mill capitalized the creation of the Blandin Foundation, where I work, with a mission, in CK's words, to improve the village of Grand Rapids. So that was our founding mission. Today, Blandin is Minnesota's largest rural-based, rural-serving foundation with an annual payout of about $20 million, which we do in grants and public programs. This is the UPM headquarters in downtown Finland, which now controls a lot about the fate of what's going to happen in north central Minnesota. It's a Finnish conglomerate, UPM Kymmene, and they're reinventing themselves. They're no longer a paper company. They're calling themselves all about, quote, beyond fossils. And so will the Blandin mill in Grand Rapids be where UPM decides to place its investments in corporate transformation? The future of this mill and the core of our economy feels at risk, and our community has little or no voice in the fate of it. Those decisions are being made in corporate boards in Helsinki. And that's a scary place to be for people that love our community. And so what's a community leader to do? What community leaders in Itasca County and in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho can do and must do is to understand that change, while change is inevitable, progress is optional. Broadband has become the indispensable infrastructure of our time. And if you don't already have broadband, and based on what Mason just said, you don't, that's bad. You guys are underperforming against national averages. If you don't already have it, which you don't, it's not coming unless you do something about it yourselves. You gotta, whoops, why isn't my thing working here? Here we go. It's time to quit your belly aching. That's what we say up north here. Quit your belly aching and get to work on broadband. Like each of you at Blandin Foundation, we care about rural communities. And that's pretty much the long and short about why we're working on rural broadband. Like Innovia Foundation works in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho, Blandin Foundation works across rural Minnesota to address systemic rural challenges and enhance community well-being. And for both of our organizations, Innovia and Blandin, that means we've figured out that means helping communities get and use the broadband they need to survive and thrive in the 21st century, because we understand, as Mason's already quoted me, everything is better with broadband. Evidence abounds that high-speed internet access has loads of economic and social benefits. And here are some examples I'm going to run through real quick with human faces. Broadband helps me to reach out to potential customers. I need broadband to better my future and schoolwork. Broadband helps patients connect to remote healthcare resources. Broadband is needed for economic growth, and broadband connects me to the rest of the world from rural. Broadband creates future leaders. And so while everything is better with broadband, the opposite is also true. Access denied is opportunity denied. Today, some communities in America have access to decent broadband, and many don't, including many in your region. This FCC shows us that, the comparisons between metro and urban across rural America, are just not acceptable. You can see that, there's multiple times less access to rural people than urban, and that's just not okay. The need for broadband access in rural America and in your region is real, it's urgent, and it's growing. And the problem is that as you guys, those of us that don't have it struggle without, those that have it, it's getting better. And so the gap is actually widening. I want to ring the bell of alarm today because this is a problem that's going in the wrong direction for rural places. So the reasons that Blandin and Innovia are working to help rural communities get access to the internet and the skills to use it are the same reasons why you as community leaders need to care about this. It's because broadband is an engine of economic vitality and growth. We call ourselves the North Woods up here. I don't know if you guys call yourselves the North Woods, but And it's because broadband is necessary infrastructure for attracting and retaining youth, knowledge workers, retirees, innovators, and entrepreneurs. Nobody's going to come and live in your town if you don't have broadband access. And broadband allows for efficiencies and enhancements in government services, especially in rural places. And it enables access to telemedicine. COVID has had a profound impact. It's really ripped the blinders off our eyes to see what telemedicine and broadband enabled telehealth can mean for doctors, clinics, and people in rural places. Look at these statistics and imagine if you're living, and many of you are, in a community where these services are not available to because you do not have the broadband infrastructure it takes to support it. Broadband offers opportunity to learners everywhere, and it enables innovation and provides a front door onto the global commerce. So this is a guy in Bemidji, Minnesota, Stitsworth Meats. This is Joe Stitsworth. And he worked with us to use the internet and social media to promote his business. And he has taken Facebook by storm. This little butcher shop in Bemidji, Minnesota has over 11,000 Facebook friends. And he credits his Facebook page and using social media well with 50% growth in his retail business. So that's why we're here today, to understand that for our communities to get the broadband we want and need, it's up to us, to you, right, as local leaders of your communities to do something about it. Coming from Minnesota, where we're all infamously practice what they call Minnesota nice, it feels a little awkward to be metaphorically at least waving my finger at a bunch of fiercely independent sons and daughters of frontiersmen and women to whom I've only just been introduced, to tell you that you are the ones that have to take this on. But it is true. If your community doesn't yet have the broadband, it's not going to happen unless you do something about it. Or maybe you'll get some broadband, some kind of solution eventually someday for some, but not necessarily for all of your residents. And maybe it's not going to be good enough to really support the kind of economy they want to have. Because without your hard work, there's no guarantee that the internet that finally does come to your town is going to be affordable, that it's going to be high capacity, that you need for the future of your community. Providers put profits first. For-profit providers put profits first. And it's up to you as community leaders to help build future-proof broadband solutions that put people's first. So this is Jerry Garcia. And like he said, somebody has to do something. And it's just incredibly pathetic that it has to be us. Just to drive the point home of how valuable broadband infrastructure is to your communities and your residents, let's look at some formulas that have been developed to quantify the value of broadband at the individual and community level. So we know, a lot of research now, we've had broadband out there for about a decade, that households with broadband enjoy a big economic benefit per year versus those without. And we also know that fiber delivered internet boosts home values by up to 3.1%. So what does this mean for your community? You can calculate your return on investment. This is straightforward math. You can bring this to your county. Many of you are county commissioners, township leaders, and others that you need to get support for. And you simply multiply the number served of homes that are served by this figure, $1,850 value, to get the current value of broadband in your community, right? And then, and I want to just note that this $1,850 is a conservative, that's at the bottom estimate of the range. It's the real value is probably a lot higher than that. This is a conservative number. And also, we're not looking at the businesses. This is just residential values. And this is an annual number. So every year, households get this benefit. We use this calculation to look at 5 rural Minnesota communities and found that communities often recoup their public investment within the first year of broadband deployment. Now, it doesn't mean that the provider clears a profit, right? But it does mean that every household sees an increase in economic benefit. So how you can frame that Here are some ways you can frame these facts and values. And the idea is to compare it to any other community investment you might be talking about. How much do we spend on roads and bridges, schools and tractor tires? So, and comparing it to the cost of the investment. So it's really easy to just make this case to your community residents about the benefits of broadband investment. Now, it is difficult, right? And Mason's talked about this, for a provider to make investments like this, because again, these economic benefits don't accrue directly to the provider, they accrue to the community. It's just a matter of having to figure out a way to balance the business case for the provider with the business case for the community, and keeping the public purpose at the center is what we public servants, community leaders and volunteers are all about. And this is why cooperatives have a distinct advantage as a community partner, because they are much better positioned to make public investments the way they work as cooperatives. So I'm sure you've seen this Everett-Rogers adoption curve. Where do you think your region is on this curve today in terms of broadband access and adoption? Think about that. In my personal experience, the easy stuff's been done. And if it was profitable, if it was easy, it would have been built by now. You guys are sitting in a part of the country where it's not. And so something's gotta be done. You know, the really poorly served rural communities in Minnesota that have been left behind by market forces that are working on this are facing some tough barriers, and they're the same barriers you guys are going to face. Local governments are cash strapped, right? Now we can talk a little bit about all the big tsunami of resources coming. That's going to change the game, and being ready to accept and absorb those resources is a big opportunity. A lot of communities lack, as Mason pointed out, provider partners. And that's a big difference between communities that have who's their provider partner. It can be, you know, and then some communities that don't have good partners decide to do it themselves. Nobody's coming to save us, we're going to do it ourselves. But that leap to municipal ownership can be a tough leap, intimidating and hard. And, you know, it's a tough topic, right? It's complicated. And most of the consultants are selling something. So it's hard as a public servant to know what's really, you know, keeping the interest of your community at the center is really the task. So we're hopeful that electric co-ops and municipal electric utilities can be part of the answer in provider poor environments. And maybe that's true in your region as well. Could the electric co-ops, the municipally owned electric utilities, be part of the solution? Might your Washington Rural Electric Co-op Association, or in Idaho, the Idaho Consumer Owned Utilities Association, be partners to you in this? Maybe they could. But what your communities need most, especially if you're still unserved, is you. You are the leaders your community are waiting for. At Blandin, we say, leadership, you gotta do it yourself, but you can't do it alone. Because broadband access and the skills to use it are indispensable infrastructure for a prosperous, inclusive future. But community leadership is the secret ingredient to getting it done. As Mason said, it's about 20% technology and 80% sociology. That's how you got to think about this problem. So philanthropy, public servants, chambers of commerce have a fat toolbox to work on this. Knowledge sharing is a good example of what we're doing here today. Blandin Foundation has and our friends at Innovia are going to share some tools into the chat box. Now we've got a blog that we do, Blandin Broadband blog, that I commend to you. Reports, research, meetings, convening people, being a catalytic convener like Innovia is doing with all of you, creating a leadership cohort that's amazing for your region. We do a lot of direct technical assistance, and Barbara and Jim are going to talk to you now about that. They participate in that program. Obviously, advocacy. In Minnesota, we have a statewide Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition that's played a really important role at the state capitol to get public investment in adoption and access, of course, grant making. And their risk management is around helping to fund feasibility studies, because communities, as you're on the road to getting investment, you need you need feasibility. And that can often be hard to get county commissioners or township supervisors to open their purse for a study. So as a foundation, we provide seed funding to help get that done. So at Blandin, we have a fat, I'm almost done here. I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues in a minute. We have a fat end of the funnel. We try to meet communities where they're at, everywhere from on-demand broadband news and training, different kinds of programs. And in the chat box, you can find links to these different programs. It's essentially, some of them are more about adoption and use, some are more about getting broadband infrastructure if you don't have it. But it's all trying to help communities build the capacity, the leadership capacity they need to stick with this. Because the other thing we say besides quit your belly aching is stick-to-itiveness is the secret sauce to success. So I wanted to just quote to you from this. This is Rick Svay. He's a county commissioner from Lake County up on the Lake Superior. And whoops, I want to go back. And Rick said, they made a very courageous decision a bunch of years ago to invest public funds in a broadband network. They got a lot of flack for it. It was tough. The incumbent provider came at them. There were lawsuits. It was not pretty. But here's what he says today, reflecting back on this decision he made as a county commissioner in 2009. This is quoted in the Lake County News Chronicle. Rick says, I think one of the things you have to remember is we started this project off and we encountered all kinds of obstacles that we never thought we were going to have. But at the end result, if the county had not stepped up to move in that direction of putting broadband throughout the county, it wouldn't have happened. No other provider was going to build a broadband network with the speeds and capacities that we now have for our rural constituency. And this is, we made a bunch of awards to folks in Minnesota, Courageous Broadband Leadership Awards, because it takes leadership to get this done. Christopher Mitchell runs an outfit called, I love this name, and you Idahodians and Washingtonians who are independent, you're gonna love this too. Check it out, Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They've got a program called The Rules Matter. And here's what Christopher says. Broadband has become a top issue in many areas, and it has immediate implications for health, jobs, education, and more. But the solutions that we devise today will be with us for decades. We've heard for more than 20 years that a magic solution was just around the corner. It's not. Expanding internet access in many rural communities is more of a 30-year problem than a 3-year one. Taking an easy solution today, especially committing to working with a partner that is not committed to the future of the community, is a risky proposition. Cooperatives and municipal approaches that have stood the test of time, they have stood the test of time. We still have 20,000 cities providing their own electric service. Some of the independent companies will be good long-term partners and some may not. I suspect you may be able to tell the difference. Just don't rush into something for the sake of getting it over with. Your communities will live or leave with the decisions that you make for many years. In other words, what Chris was trying to say is that picking a broadband provider partner and solution is more like a marriage than a dance. Choose your provider partner carefully. You're going to have to live with them for a long time. Be picky. Keep your community's future and needs at the center of the decisions. What network is good enough? Wireless, wireline, symmetrical, what's good enough? You care about your community. Those providers care less. I mean, less than you do. I mean, they care nothing. So anyway, I hope this call to leadership in helping your communities articulate and advance your community broadband goals inspires you and helps you see that Jerry Garcia is right. It's up to you. Leadership, you got to do it yourself, but you can't do it alone. Again, you're fortunate here in your region to have support and encouragement of the folks at Innovia. And with your frontier can-do spirit and your love of your communities, I think you got this. Broadband is an important part of the answer. You're the ones to do this, and the time is now. So I'm gonna, now it's my great pleasure to turn over the mic to Barbara Dror Klein, who's with us from as she says, Lesueur, Minnesota. Barbara is a knitter. She's a horse lover. She's a good neighbor, a team builder, and an inspirational civic leader. Thank you, Barbara, for being us here with today. She's going to talk a little bit about her experience working with Blandin on broadband.
Thank you. So let me share a little bit about my background. Is I have an eclectic background, which really is a good eclectic background for broadband work. I am a master's in social work. I was on the CAL FIRE Safe board and helped with fire mitigation out there. I've been on septic system advisory boards. I was a county coroner at one point. And after the 1989 earthquake in California, I ran the shelters for 2 months. And this gives me a background of resilience, turning a corner and looking for the money. And so that's really been beneficial for me. I lived 2 chunks of my life in Northern California. My last chunk, we moved back 5 years ago to this lovely old house where I found out I was in frontier telephone territory and not eligible for the fiber that my neighbor had a 1/4 mile away. I was shocked to find out about the telephone territory restrictions. So that was in, so I'm going to go through how Blandin has helped us. We would not be where we are without our Blandin support. And this will give you some ideas about how you can support your communities out there. So first of all, we're about 26,000 residents just south of the metro area, but we are rural. We were the Valley of the Jolly Green Giant. He's dead, owned by somebody in another country, but that's us, very rural. So in early 2018, and my county commissioner was also my horse veterinarian. So he and I had a lot of conversations about community organizing and doing things. And in 2018, our Region 9 had a broadband summit that Blandin came to and I went to and met all kinds of people working on broadband things and got lots of ideas about doing community organizing here. And so I met with my county commissioner and we did our first grant proposal to Blandin in the spring of 2018, May 2018. We applied to be a Blandin broadband community and we were turned down flat. And they were so right. We were not ready. We were not at all ready. But what they did is they sent us Bill Coleman, a fabulous consultant who came down and told us about Broadband 101. We started a steering committee. We had a provider meeting. One of the providers, major providers, stood up in the room and said, "We're not doing anything. Don't come in our telephone territory. We'll challenge it." So we started then with, and then we went up to Grand Rapids from southern Minnesota. And 4 of us in the county and our CEO from BevCom, which is a telephone company provider in one part of our county. We were locked in a windowless room for 5 days, 3 days, I guess, learning about feasibility studies. We came out of there, went to the county board with a resolution for $25,000 of funds for feasibility study with Blandin providing the other $25,000, and we were on a roll. So then we get to 2019, we have our feasibility study. We start our work. We have a terrific program in Minnesota called Border to Border, which puts together local dollars with state dollars and helps you to start to map out fiber. So 2019, we worked with BevCom, which is a local telephone company provider, and Jaguar, which was a local company, which has now been purchased. And we wrote 2 grants and one of them was funded. So the first one that was funded was $1.8 million. And then half of that was the other, and the $300,000 of county dollars and half of that was township dollars. So that was our ground laying to lay this out in a different way. We engaged, we had a steering committee as well, and this laid the foundation for our future work to get this going. So we were very excited. 2020. What a year. So we started out in 2020. And at that point, I've been doing this as a part-time volunteer. And in 2020, we knew we were going to need more. And so the county was given $20,000 from Blandin to support my work as a consultant with a $10,000 match. And then we got our award. We got our award from from BevCom, from the state. So in February 2020, we met with both BevCom and Jaguar, and we talked about a joint application that maybe the county would do so that we're not competing against each other. But then we went back to 2 applications because of the merger in the one county. So we also in 2020 applied for, and we were approved to be a Blandin broadband community 2 years later, and received a $75,000 grant. We had a June virtual meeting of about 60 people, many of whom I have yet to meet, and we talked about what we want to do for broadband planning in our county. Another shift, our county got $3.5 million of CARES Act dollars, and we have had a terrific county administrator, and $277,000 to the townships. We shifted gears early July and went to CARES Act funding. We took our projects that we'd identified under the Blandin grant and shifted everything over to a discussion about how we could build out the community more with the CARES Act dollars. We ended up with, let's see, of the townships had 277,000, 200,000 of that came to the county for broadband. I went out to every one of the 14 townships and talked to them about broadband, filled out the paperwork, uploaded it to the state so that we could get those funds shifted over to the county. We built out, one township built out additional households that were in a different telephone territory that weren't covered in the state grant. We did $1 million for fixed wireless broadband that was more reliable than what we had. We did $535,000 of fiber in the ground with Jaguar, now Metronet, from one end of the county to the other, with the plan to build out on top of that with the border-to-border grants that we submitted. So it was, and then on top of that, we bought Cradle Point devices and Chromebooks for our emergency and fire and ambulance vehicles, and then some respiratory devices, which I can't even rename or subscribe to you. We also put $32,000 towards building out Wi-Fi at our fairgrounds and some of the county parks and the township halls. We bought Google Suite for Government, and we're still working on that in terms of, and you'll see my email is one of those. We bought Google Suite for Government so that we can operate together and manage our Chromebooks and do things in a whole different way. So that was a wild 5 months of planning, and the fiber got in the ground by December 1st. Yes, there's still some problems where there was some snowbanks and they have to move some stuff, but wow, that was terrific. So 2020 was a fabulous year. That's what I mean about being able to convert and look at different things and see what opportunities are there. So 2021, our 2 border-to-border grants were not approved. We had from BevCom and Metronet because of RDOF funding. RDOF is that federal program of census, where you're funded by census tract, low bid. It was a provider that we have in the state, and actually started in the state, but the company doesn't have fiber experience. Our 2 applications were denied. We were devastated. We were angry, devastated. I was actually on Minnesota Public Radio talking about this issue. That's how upset I was, because we had shovel in the ground this spring, and we don't have that because of that. And that would have been another 500 households. We're still talking with Metronet and BevCom about what we can do with the new RDOF dollars, the new ARF dollars coming down. But with a pile of money spread around the county from federal dollars and not knowing when or how that will be used, that's a huge problem. And Chris Mitchell, who Bernadine talked about, he actually did an analysis of the RDOF funds, and some of our census tracts got $600 of funding, and the whole census tract is not out-of-state funding. So we're in a mode of trying to figure out where we're going to go next with our planning. Our townships we have laid the groundwork. I'm the main speaker at our all elected official township meeting. I was the main speaker at the all county elected officials meeting talking about this. All of our cities are getting new fiber, but where we're going to go with this, we won't really know until we know about the RDOF, which won't be until September. So we're working and planning and talking still, laying the groundwork. With our $75,000 Blandin grant, we are so thrilled that we're getting a Lead for America Fellow to work on broadband in August. It's 2 years, $15,000 each year from our Blandin grant, $10,000 from Land O'Lakes. That young person will come in and work for 2 years at out of one of our schools to help us to build out more on the broadband and work on the use of broadband issues, of which we have a lot. We also, one of our Blandin projects is we have a county-wide envisioning meeting July 15th to talk about economic development as well as broadband and bringing together people and have them come together, up to 100 people at our county fairgrounds, which will be wired by then, thankfully. And lastly, what I want to say is I can't say enough about the seeds that were casted in support from Blandin. We would not be where we are. And Bernadine described it very well. It's a hand up, not a handout. And we wouldn't be here without them. And we're waiting in place to see what'll happen next. Steering committee was really important, and working with the township and all the elected officials, that was really key. The county right next to us, they went out and talked to every township, didn't get the piece of paper. And that was our emergency services person said, this is the township, take the piece of paper out there, have them sign it, and you send it up. The county right next to us, a lot of the townships didn't even apply for the federal dollars last time. They didn't have the wherewithal or the knowledge to do it. So the partnerships that we've laid is really terrific. And we're excited about moving ahead once we see what happens with those RDOF funds.
Barbara, thank you so much for that story. And with haste and with my eye on the clock, I'm going to now introduce Jim Yount from far-flung Koochiching County. I think that may be the most remote, whatever, you guys are in the running. Jim is a visionary, he's tenacious, he's creative, and he steps up to the highest responsibility he can in his community. And like Barbara, he's a real team builder. Jim Yount, share your reflections from International Falls in Koochiching County.
Well, ironically, I'm going to start about as far off from that as possibly can and see how quickly I can bring it back to topics we're all here to discuss about today. When I was graduating from college, I was invited to go to Madagascar to be a junior flunky assistant on a deforestation research project. And turns out that was a 3-month project, but the ticket was good for a year. So I stuck around and learned so much. It was just an amazing experience. And basically, I ended up doing something like independent Peace Corps. I tried all sorts of different ideas, see what could be the most potentially useful. One thing I realized was the dictionaries and phrase books for English speakers in Madagascar were horrible. And I had written up notes on the words and phrases that I had learned doing our deforestation study. And that turned out that would be useful for other researchers to have. So that kept growing. I started talking to more and more experts in a wide variety of fields, research and development, locals and foreigners. And it ended up snowballing into a 500-word Malagasy French and English dictionary and phrase book. And I got to meet tons and tons of people doing that. And I became addicted to sharing ideas and sharing my own, but hearing other ideas that other people had. And I learned a lot of lessons through that process. One of which is, boy, don't assume that these really, really interesting people have heard of each other and heard of these other projects. It's amazing how little they have. And I just had a blast telling people about other people's projects and making connections, and really just, I decided that my life was going to be largely about making connections between people from different backgrounds, different expertise. So I ended up pursuing a course of study in which I'm kind of half anthropologist and half ecologist, none of which is terribly relevant to broadband, but the general approach is. And I learned to throw out, sow seeds, throw out ideas like you're sowing seeds, and some are going to sprout and some will not. And to not worry about failure. You know, if you want to succeed more, you have to fail more. I forget who said that quote, but it really is true. And most projects won't come to life, but just be ready to drop whatever projects, whatever ideas come up that might not be gaining momentum. So, and another thing is you'll really be surprised where you can find hidden talent. Somebody who I had known who was a custodian at a local community center, kind of foundered through high school and just kind of figuring his way through life, ended up showing up at the Blandin Foundation's Community Leadership Program and we had some great conversations. And a couple of years later, an opportunity presented itself, and we started a technology store, which is a jack of all trades store. We do everything from fixing phones and helping people with Facebook to installing data networks and security systems now. Which brings me to another hidden talent. I met a guy, I had a friend who was a musician, played in a blues band, long-haired, kind of chill about everything. And he was mowing the grass sometime for a job that he had. And he said, I used to pull some cable as well. Turned out he had helped design and install the security system for the Pentagon and done a fiber optic retrofit of a fighter jet. And he ended up working for us on, relatively humble projects by comparison, but projects that helped meet the infrastructure needs of our community and the various businesses that we have. And then, when I learned that the Blandin Foundation, once I got on their mailing list from the leadership program, had this program to build broadband communities, I was like, oh, well, that's going to happen. I know several people who would be great for that, and met quite a few more through the startup process. And the project that they do, the approach they have, it sounds a lot like what Innovia likes to do, where you're really building a community team, and it's much more about that local capacity building than it is about any particular specific projects that they do. So we built that together, and we ended up becoming more or less a community think tank for the county. The county commissioners knew that this internet stuff was like super important, and they needed to get on it somehow, but they really didn't know how to make it part of a thriving future and what to do. So they really appreciated having this group of volunteers to brainstorm and put in the legwork to help make various things happen. And we did have a lot of projects that didn't fail that sounded absolutely fantastic. I imagine you've heard about maker spaces where people can get together and do creative building of whatever, get access to tools and make wonderful projects. A lot of people were enthusiastic about that. You know what? Particular people, they just didn't quite match. They didn't quite get along. It was going to be like herding cats, and you know what? I guess that was not going to happen. There was a regional marketing effort for tourism that was explored, and that also, there was just a little bit too much clashing. And also fixed wireless, which is a wonderful solution for internet in a lot of areas. It turns out, well, you could sort of do it here, but it's not actually the best technological fit for our topology, our population density, and the amount of trees and stuff that we have. So we had to let that one drop. But some other things just were an amazing success. I'd heard of the idea of a co-working center, which I'm guessing many of you have encountered. I was like, that's an amazing idea. And I just happened to mention it casually to a neighbor of mine who owns a furniture store that she was trying to sell. And she's like, you know what? 24 hours later, after hearing the idea for the first time, they had fully committed into turning their furniture store into a co-working center, which it now is. Suffered a little bit during the pandemic, which it started just before, but it is almost certainly going to take off. And there's just all sorts of ideas like that. And we happened to do a presentation invited to by the Blandin Foundation to explore possibilities for providing internet, and a internet service cooperative heard our presentation and said, that's good. You guys seem to have some energy. You have the pulse of the people on the ground. We would like to prioritize your area for the next expansion of our internet service. And if they can get the fiber during the current shortages we're having from the supply chain interruptions and such, they will this year provide the best internet in the county to half of the people who currently have the worst internet in the county. If it doesn't happen this year, it'll happen next year, but we're still somewhat optimistic that they will get the fiber and the cabling that they need. We also were able to kind of grease the wheels between a different internet service provider and an electric cooperative to talk about ideas that weren't going to pan out. Many electric cooperatives have become internet service providers. We'd heard about that. Really fantastic idea. We made the connections, knew some people on the board, tried to do the whole song and dance and sell them on, hey, you guys could provide internet as well for your customers who are in some of the least served parts of our county. And they just weren't going to buy it. But cable TV company, that major internet provider in the area, did want to expand into that area. And we were able to help make connections that ended up with them cooperating with that same electric cooperative to have access to their poles to run their fiber and maintain the network themselves. And now that is finally starting. And hopefully that'll address one of our other highly unmet need areas that's key to our tourism industry, the whole Rainy Lake East tourism area. So that's another example of just, you know, chance favoring a prepared mind, basically. So, you know, now we have new challenges affecting us. We just learned last week that our newspaper is shutting down permanently by the end of the month. It's a familiar story. I'm sure that's happened in your area for some as well. And, you know, it's a reality we're going to have to deal with. But fortunately, we have local connections of people who've already been putting a lot of thought into that. We've met some regional connections, some of them through the Blandin Foundation, of folks who have explored modern alternatives, online alternatives to a newspaper. We're not looking at it with rose-colored glasses. We appreciate just how challenging it can be and that you need a real viable, financially viable model, and just to accept the realities of the modern era and social media and the whole thing. But we are now actively pursuing that and putting together a group of stakeholders to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, see what solutions might work out, and we just don't know yet. So that's on the cutting edge. So I think we probably need to wrap up very soon. So if I could throw out just one last bit of advice, it's don't worry about the imposter syndrome. If you haven't heard about that, it's something I suffer from, many other people do. You see all these people that seem super confident, super capable, and you just think, I don't belong here. I'm not as good as these people. I can't pull anything off. I feel that all the time. I've kind of learned over time to just, you know, nope, I recognize that feeling. I'm just gonna blow it off and I'm gonna keep dabbling in what I might be able to do and contribute in whatever ways I can find, and keep finding and collaborating with great people, and we'll see what happens. And many of them, they feel that imposter syndrome as well. So you're not alone if that's how you feel. Thank you very much.
Love that. Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks for that. Over to you, Mason.
I'm going to turn it over to Aaron for a couple of comments. We really appreciate our friends from Minnesota being here today. I think we have some of the same challenges. A lot of the comments in the chat box illustrate that there's a lot of questions about the relationship between providers, new providers coming in the community, existing providers. And the question is how are they going to respond to community needs? Because this is a, you know, infrastructure for the next century now. This is not, you know, it's kind of like electricity for our age. And if we want to preserve some, you know, sense of equity across our region, both with underserved groups and across urban and rural areas, the community needs to be involved in that conversation. And so, you know, we're really grateful for examples of communities that have been active and for a foundation that has been committed. Thank you for being here. And I mean, if we have some extra questions, we might be able to send them your way, Bernadine. We appreciate your time. And Aaron,
You bet. I'd be happy. Jim and Barbara and I all would be happy to follow up with any of you. And good for you. Keep at it. And I really appreciate the chance to meet all of you this morning and be with you. I guess it's afternoon out there. Morning. I'm confused. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Jim and Barbara, thanks so much for your personal accounts and your passion around this topic. The stories that you each told, we're really grateful. Bernadine, I want to thank you for being all over the chat box. Your comments and interaction with our community were fabulous. And thank you so much for setting the stage for this conversation and the powerful and inspirational work that Blandin Foundation has been doing. We're really grateful for your expertise and your input, and we value our relationship with you and your organization. And then I want to thank all of our participants today, the chat box today, and the comments from each of our speakers just illustrate how complex, but how important this topic is. And as a community foundation serving North Idaho and Eastern Washington, Innovia is committed to continuing to provide leadership in this work, coordinating our efforts and doing everything we can to advance the importance of broadband accessibility in our communities. So we're really grateful. I just want to close out with a reminder that, again, this is the third in our series of Leadership Summit events. We are not going to host an event in July and August. We've learned enough about our region to know that the attendance would be sparse. So rather, we're going to take off these next 2 summer months, but we are going to pull everyone back together for our 4th and final event in September. And I've just dropped into the chat box the details of that event. We are looking forward to it. Wednesday, September the 8th, Leadership Summit Workshop number 8. We're going to be addressing the educational opportunity gap with a particular razor focus on rural and urban communities. Our keynote speaker for that event will be Erin Jones. Those of you who know Erin know she is a Pacific Northwest educator. She's a consultant. She's a storyteller. She's an entrepreneur. And most importantly, she's a former Spokane Public Schools teacher at Rogers High School who is passionate about education, about equity, and about doing everything we can as a community to support every student on their pathway to achieving the most powerful and robust education that they can receive. And so Erin's going to guide that conversation and help set the table for the work that we are doing as a community foundation around addressing the opportunity gap in education in our region. So we invite you to join us for that event. More details will be coming to your inbox soon. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today. If you have other questions, please put those in the chat box, or you can reach out to Mason, myself, to Bernadine, to any of us. And thank you all again for joining us today. Have a great day and take care. Thank you, Bernadine and Jim and Barbara. That was excellent. Well done. Really good stuff. Boy, there were some great comments and questions in the chat box.
Yeah, your audience seemed pretty well, and some of those questions were quite informed questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a few kind of regional experts. We probably should acknowledge some of the, like the extension offices of the universities were there, and they've been really active in the broadband teams. I'm Deb Hansen and Monica Babine's group. But I love but then also we just had some other, like you said, elected officials with the Mayor of Pullman, other just community members that may not know a lot about this at all.